Well, the House Judiciary Committee held a hearing this week talking about anti-Semitism, free speech on college campuses and universities, especially since the beginning of the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. And joining me to talk a little bit more broadly about anti-Semitism, free speech on college campuses and universities is Grace Bydalek. She's the director of the Dissident Project. We're going to find out more about that in just a second. Grace, thank you for joining me on the DC Debrief. How are you?
I'm so good. John, thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to talk to you. And this is obviously a very important topic right now. Anti-Semitism on college campuses has been growing. There has long been, I think, especially among conservatives, a worry that free speech on college campuses and universities has been in a serious and steep decline over the last few decades, really. And certainly the war in the Middle East with Israel and Hamas has only exacerbated that, it seems. The White House and the Department of Education put out a warning this week to colleges and universities that they needed to do more. Can you tell us, how bad is it right now on college campuses and universities? How serious is this problem?
Yeah, John, I think certainly we have to separate the idea of freedom of speech with the idea of terrorism, right? And supporting terrorism writ large. So in New York City, the situation is fairly dire. That's where I'm based. You know, students at Columbia University beat an Israeli student with a stick, you know, after he confronted a woman tearing down pictures of hostages. And then, of course, at Cooper Union College, as was widely reported, Jewish students were barricaded in a library as protesters were banging on the door, chanting, you know, things like "Long live the Intifada." While, of course, the incredibly courageous Laura Sparks, the university president, escaped through a back door, right? And of course, the list of participating campuses when it comes to pro-Palestine rallies goes on and on and on. We've got Stanford, we've got NYU, we've got Northwestern, we've got Georgetown, George Washington University, Berkeley. The list continues ad nauseum and includes, unfortunately, my dear alma mater. One of the protest signs at Michigan read, "There is only one solution, Intifada revolution." And of course, we understand what that particular phrase harkens back to. And so I think the situation on college campuses is incredibly dire.
FBI Director Chris Wray at a hearing last week said that even though Jewish people make up a little under 2.5% of the American population, they are on the receiving end of 60% of the threats of religious-based threats against people in America. So that didn't just happen within the last few months, right? This has been something that's ongoing for a long time. But have we seen this anti-Semitism specifically on college campuses grow significantly since the start of the war? Or has this always been there, just maybe kind of on the back burner?
You know, I think it's probably been there on the back burner, but we have seen people become more brazen about it. I think that there have been more visible attacks on Jewish students, and there is more sort of discomfort among Jewish students now that people are emboldened, right? And then, of course, on the large scale, we see reports of anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. Spiked 300% year over year the week after the October 7th attack. You know, I live again in New York City, where 1 in 4 people is a Jew, and one of the most beautiful things about New York City, and I truly mean this, is the fact that the religious communities in New York are so vibrant and so visible. And so, you know, you'll see I don't know, an Orthodox Jewish community in East Williamsburg on Shabbat going to pick up a challah from the bakery down the street, or the smells in East Williamsburg are beautiful. Or, of course, like on the Upper West Side or on the East Side at Park Avenue Synagogue, you'll see young Jewish people wearing kippot and tzitzit, and be, you know, visibly celebrating their Jewish heritage and their faith. And more Jewish friends and Jewish colleagues are feeling as if they have to hide their Jewish identity, which I think is just an incredible tragedy.
What is it that makes it so difficult for colleges and universities to rein in this type of behavior?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think We've seen these college groups are the same college groups that in 2020 were really promoting the idea of Black Lives Matter, right? They were promoting the idea of this sort of new lexicon, this Marxist, for lack of a better word, lexicon that has been really popularized, specifically in intellectual circles, where it's the language of the oppressor and the oppressed. It's the language of Patrisse Cullors and Ibram X. Kendi, and we shouldn't be surprised, unfortunately, that sort of ideology has led us to this moment, right? It's taken us to this logical end, where the typically comforting platitudes of progressive identity politics, again, the simplistic language of oppressor and oppressed, have actually led to terrorism, have led to violence, and now are leading to a rash of anti-Semitism. People calling Israel and Israelis and Jews in particular colonizers and oppressors, though none of those classifications are historically accurate.
Well, and that kind of dovetails into my next question. Do you think a lot of the students, and maybe even some of the faculty members, but the people who are engaged in these anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian arguments, I mean, there's obviously a heart that goes out to the Palestinian civilians and the children who are caught up in the violence, and certainly you want to speak for their rights and for their health and for their safety. But it seems as though maybe there is a conflation between being pro-Palestinian civilian safety for all of them, while at the same time understanding the nuances of what's been happening there in the Middle East. Do you believe that there is an understanding by most of the protesters? Some of the protesters, it might be hard to pin down a specific answer to this question, but do you see that there maybe is a struggle understanding the nuance of the situation there?
Yes, I do. Absolutely. I think, unfortunately, we see this sort of logical incongruency when we're confronted with groups like Queers for Palestine, right? Like, there's no understanding about, what Hamas, what living under the jackboot of Hamas actually looks like for Palestinian civilians. And yes, of course, our hearts go out to Palestinian civilians who are caught up in the line of fire. It's egregious. Every human life is worth exactly the same, right? But again, these sort of pro-Palestinian protesters and protests have done no work to separate themselves from Hamas. And so I think, if these pro-Palestinian protests would like any sort of, legitimacy in the eyes of people who care about their Jewish brothers and sisters, to separate themselves from Hamas and to say, no, I'm not pro-Hamas. I am pro-Palestinian people. I am pro Gazan children. I think that is an entirely different argument. And to be completely honest with you, I think that necessitates that people be pro-Israel.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do at the Dissident Project?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Dissident Project is a speakers bureau for young people who have escaped authoritarian governments. So we have wonderful dissidents who work with us from all over the world, from places like Hong Kong, Venezuela, North Korea, Cuba, Iran, Afghanistan, and our real focus is to find them gigs within the American high school system. We see that there's a sort of historical amnesia, right? There's a lack of understanding of the impact of authoritarianism across the globe, and also a lack of understanding of the importance of our American freedoms. And so, by hearing from these dissidents one-on-one, we're really hoping that the younger generations of Americans will wake up from this sort of apathy that we see taking over that population, and will become active members of society, fighting for the preservation of American rights.
Last question for you here. What can the federal government, Congress, the White House, what can be done from maybe from a more macro level from the government to try and help tamp down anti-Semitism in the U.S.? And if we are looking specifically at college campuses, is there anything they can do looking at college campuses in this regard?
Well, I think we've seen the Biden administration go very wobbly over the past few weeks in particular. You know, I was pleasantly surprised by the Biden administration's response to the terrorist attacks on October 7th. Initially, when they came out strongly in support of Israel. I think, unfortunately, we've seen again, as I said, as anti-Semitism has risen year over year, 300%. In the week following the terrorist attack, we saw Kamala Harris set up a task force on Islamophobia instead of focusing on the Jewish people who were the victims of this terrorist attack. So really staying as pro-Israel as possible in their rhetoric, I think is necessary, and refusing to kowtow to other younger members of Congress that might have them say otherwise.
Hey, Grace, if people want to find out more about the Dissident Project, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are at dissidentproject.org. If you would like to check out our roster of speakers or potentially bring a speaker to your school, you can check out all of our speakers there and book your event there. And in addition to that, we are on both Twitter and Instagram at Dissident Proj, Proj. And you can find past media hits and reels. And we're really, really excited about the sort of groundswell of enthusiasm that we've seen for the project over the past few months. So if you'd like to be a part of that movement, please reach out.
Great. Well, Grace, thank you so much for coming on the DC Debrief and talking to us more about this. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it.